Hello, and welcome to the 8th episode of Parenting Beyond Belief for this year. Parenting Beyond Belief is a production of the Atheist Community of Austin, an educational nonprofit dedicated to the separation of government and religion and the promotion of positive atheist culture. If you're watching on YouTube, please click that subscribe button. We are up to a little over 1,000 subscribers now, which is very exciting. If you're listening to us on Spreaker, please click that little orange subscribe button. And if you like what we do, please consider sponsoring us on Patreon. We have a few sponsors that we're going to be thanking at the end of the show. We are going to do things a little bit differently. I am your host, Clare Wuellner, and instead of taking calls, we are going to interview Dale McGowan, who is a regular host on this show as well. But since the name of the show hails from his work and he is so important in this field, I wanted to do a full-on interview. So how are you doing, Dale?
I'm good. How you doing, Claire?
I'm doing all right. I will do a bio, a really complete bio. Normally we don't do this much stuff, but we're really going to tell you all about him. Dale McGowan was the founding executive director of Foundation Beyond Belief. He is the author and editor of several books, including Parenting Beyond Belief, right, cheer, Raising Free Thinkers, right, cheer, and Atheism for Dummies, which I've buried. It's also here. And I think that's quite an accomplishment to get to write that sort of book. You know you're big in the field when you get to write the definitive book for dummies. Let's see. We get questions on the show about parenting when one parent is a believer and the other is not. And Dale has covered that aspect of parenting too by authoring In Faith and in Doubt. From 2007 to 2014, he authored a blog called The Memeing of Life, which is a resource I have turned to again and again. He was named Harvard Humanist of the Year for his work in non-religious parent education. Dale holds a PhD in music composition and teaches music at Oglethorpe University in Atlanta. He currently hosts 3 podcasts: Raising Free Thinkers, How Music Does That, and The Lucky Ones. So he's, keep him busy.
That's right.
That's all. Right on. So let's just dig right in. You have said that you started writing books about parenting in a secular way because you couldn't find any that you felt were meeting the need that you felt was out there, right? How did you put together the initial ideas for this book? How do you start from nothing when you make something like this?
Well, I really was starting from nothing, from close to nothing. My kids were young. The very idea of me writing a parenting book at the time I did is a little much. But that's the reason I didn't do it alone. I knew that I wasn't in a position to give all the wisdom that needed to be brought together. So the idea that I presented to my agent initially was for a book for non-religious parents that would have a large number of contributors, people with, a lot of different self-claimed labels, atheists, humanists, agnostics, and so on, and a lot of different types of experience. Some who are just parents, some who are psychologists, educators, philosophers. I had a whole range, a couple of celebrity voices. So the idea was to really take a snapshot of where we were at that point as a community and to bring together the knowledge that we could, and to do it in a way that would sort of launch the conversation, which at that point, like you said, really wasn't going yet. There was no other comprehensive book on the subject. There were a couple of, there were articles and essays, there were a couple of blogs out there and that sort of thing. But my idea was to just sort of tap that voice. I brought together 27 people all together, including some people who couldn't complain, like Mark Twain and Bertrand Russell. They lined up. But that was the idea. And then we tried to get a publisher and had a heck of a time for a long time. Not because they didn't like the content, but because they felt that there was no market for it. That's what we heard over and over again. Yeah, 26, 27 publishers, I think we went through at first. And they said, get this, I love this line. They said, if there was a market for it, there would already be books for it.
Fascinating.
The problem is, if you're making that argument, then you're preventing the books from happening. So I brought all the demographic data together. I brought the census data. I showed the burgeoning nuns, around that period of time, because this was around 2005 that we were shopping it around. And finally, we got a publisher, a good New York publisher, who said, well, either there's no market or we're going to corner the market for it. And so that, plus names like Julia Sweeney and Richard Dawkins, that helped as well. And the book ended up being one of the best sellers that the publisher has had. So it was quite a success.
How many copies have you sold?
I think it's I think now it's in the Parenting Beyond Belief is in the neighborhood of 60,000, I think.
Yeah. So there's a demand.
So it's not J.K. Rowling, but it's for a book of that type and parenting book, it's done really well.
Yeah, and for a first one, people may not even know to look for it, but so the numbers will keep going up, I'm sure. You have two editions of it, one that came out in 2007 and another in 2016. How are they different?
They're really different. About half of the content is the same, but about half of it is completely different. And the reason is that everything changed between 2007 and 9 or 10 years later. As I said at the beginning, there were no other books. There were very few blogs. I was able to find one non-religious parent support group in the United States, searching online. Then 9 years later, there are dozens of blogs. There are dozens of books. There are scores of non-religious parent support groups all over the country. And in that time, I had also met and worked with a large number of people who could contribute to a second edition and bring their additional expertise to it. People like Neil Carter and Libby Ann and Beasia McCarriger and Wendy Thomas Russell. These were all people that I met since the first book. And it was just all part of that growing community that was happening and developing. We also started to get people with specializations that hadn't been there before, like Rebecca Hensler with Grief Beyond Belief. So we had an organization that was specifically oriented toward non-religious grieving, and the special challenges and opportunities that are there when you're outside of a religious community. It's helpful to have that focused specialization. Phil Zuckerman, a sociologist who has done a tremendous amount of really good field work on the growth of the non-religious. So Phil contributed a chapter, Rebecca contributed a chapter, Neil is there, Libby Ann is there. So it's different in content. It has more of those newer voices. And then the other thing is that my kids were older at this point. It's not just about my kids, but I had a different perspective, and I began to understand what it is that we hadn't covered in the first book. The first book was really good with the basics, religious literacy and talking to kids about death and so on. But as kids get further along, as they're preteens and teens and young adults, there are other issues that start to come along. And this book started to address community and identity and some of those issues that we touched on in the first edition, but we could really go into more depth in the second one. So I'm really happy with the way that came out and the way it sort of updated to where the community is now.
Fantastic. So if you have the first edition, do get the second edition because there's a whole slate of new stuff in there to read. When I was doing a little research to talk to you about all of this stuff, I was thinking of all the parenting books that guided me. And there was Parenting with Love and Logic, Dr. Spock's Baby and Childcare book, and there's The Happiest Baby on the Block, and then Dr. Sears' I had, the library of Dr. Sears's books. He has so many of them. And something struck me as odd, and the person who does most of the parenting in most families is the woman, right? And there are all these books that people turn to written by men. And you're a man, and you wrote a parenting book, and I think that's fascinating. So are there women parenting experts that you think should be brought to the fore, people should know more about?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's another reason, yet another reason that I had multiple contributors in both books, because a lot of women contributed to both books. And one of them is Wendy Thomas Russell, who is really a name that we had her on the show a couple of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. Wendy is a name that people ought to know, who's really making a name for herself in non-religious parenting, but also in parenting generally. She's really a go-to. Catherine Osment is another one. Catherine contributed a chapter to the second edition as well, and she has a book. Parenting with Grace or something. I can't remember but it's a non-religious approach, but it's one of those that sort of captures some religious concepts without the theism. It's really I'm blanking on the correct title, but Osment, Ozment, is another one I really highly recommend.
Neato. And we've talked about this on the show before, but Diana Baumrind, who developed the 4 parenting styles, and I thought of a way to remember the difference between authoritarian and authoritative. Authoritative has a V in it, and so does love. So authoritative is the one that you want to use. On the show, sometimes we get them turned around.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Here's something that I'm dying to ask you. You also have a degree in anthropology. How did that inform your parenting? It had to have, right?
Oh gosh, yes. Oh yeah. Well, the thing is that it was evolutionary anthropology was my focus, and once you really, I knew about evolution when I was in high school, but the reason that I majored in it in college is that I knew what I didn't know. I mean, I recognized that there was a lot more grounding that I needed to get. And once you really understand evolution, once you really spend time understanding what natural selection is all about and the synthesis with genetics and the whole thing, it changes everything. It changes the way you see the entire world. And certainly as a parent, when you think about nature and nurture, when you think about what your kids are getting from you, when you think about the evolutionary tendencies that we bring into the world, that when you think about the fact that we were evolved for a very different world than the one we live in, when you recognize that our instincts and our fears and our skills and tendencies are aimed at the African savannah 2 million years ago and not at the world that we live in right now, that produces a lot of problems. It produces a lot of problems to solve. And Kurt Vonnegut said, I've ever since I heard this, I've been trying to find the exact quote because it's so fantastic. But he said something like, once you understand evolution, especially the evolution of the brain, it becomes amazing that everything isn't a smoking heap, that, the world is a mess. Things are really problematic. We are on the verge of blowing ourselves up all the time, but we haven't. And that's actually something to celebrate. It's something to be amazed at, because it just doesn't seem like that should be possible. Mm-hmm. That given what we know and given what we are, we have still managed to make beautiful things and to be kind to each other once in a while, so that's it changed everything for me.
Yeah, right. And speaking from my own experience with having an education in evolution, it's informed my parenting in a couple of ways, and especially in terms of talking to my children about the religious world as we're trying to navigate it. And it helps because it gives me the scientific language to talk to them about why people are religious. And it also gives me the language when talking to people who are religious to help break down where their ideas fail. So, for instance, the notion that children should obey their parents just unilaterally. If you're on the savannah, it's probably a good idea to do that. And that's where that may have come from.
Right.
It saves a lot of trouble if you just simply do what your parents say. But we're not there so much anymore. And we have come to the point in our evolution, maybe more culturally than actual evolution, where we don't really need to do as we're told all the time. We don't still need to have that very atavistic attitude towards social behavior. We've learned some stuff, and we can move forward from that. So I hear you on that. That's good stuff. You and I have something else in common, and that is that we both moved from kind of the Midwest, yes, to the South. And
okay, now where did you move from?
I was raised in Iowa, and then I lived in Lawrence, Kansas, and then came down here to Austin, Texas.
Right. Okay.
So I didn't know what it meant to live in a religious world until I came down here, really.
I didn't either. I really didn't. Yeah.
Nobody asked me what church I went to. We had that horrible preacher who goes to funerals for gay people. What's his name? I can't think of his name.
Fred Phelps.
Fred Phelps. He hails from Lawrence, Kansas.
Oh, nice.
So he would be on campus yelling at people with a bullhorn. He was lovely. But everybody knew he was a nut, and that was my only real experience with it. And then I came down here, and the school board was going through its paces trying to put intelligent design into the curriculum, and that was my introduction. Plus, I needed a social system, and people said, "Oh, find a church." Yeah. I'm like, "Wow, this is totally new to me."
Right.
But how about you?
Yeah, I'd have to say that I was so nervous about the move in those terms that I mostly ended up being pleasantly surprised. I mean, I was ready. I was ready. But I think I was preparing myself for the Atlanta of 30 years ago. And the fact is, Atlanta, I mean, it's sort of like Austin in this way. It's religious, it's conservative, especially in the suburbs. But compared to the rest of the state, it's tremendously progressive. I mean, Atlanta is historically, it was the hub of the civil rights movement for a reason. Right. And the government, the city government was in support of Martin Luther King's work. And it's quite impressive. But then I'm in sort of the suburbs, which are red and voted the red way most of the time. But it isn't nearly as uniform as I thought. It is, I mean, it's a purple area, and it's increasingly purple. It's much more racially and religiously diverse than I thought it would be. It's more racially diverse than the area I was in Minnesota. We were actually in a good, diverse area just outside of the city. And this area is more diverse. I was actually thinking to myself, how am I going to raise my kids in a white Baptist Republican area, and somehow communicate to them that there are people somewhere who don't look like you, and it hasn't been an issue. That part of it has really been quite good. I'm still a relative fish out of water in religious terms, but it's not nearly as in your face as I anticipated it might be. I actually live 3 miles from North Point Church, which is the largest church in the solar system, I think. It's actually, if you count its multiple campuses in the city here, which telecast from the pulpit to the whole thing, it's larger than Saddleback. It's larger than Joel Osteen's thing.
Wow.
So it's Andy Stanley, if you've heard of him. That's his church. That's 3 miles from here. And nearly everybody I know goes there.
Whoa.
So, but it's a church that irritates evangelicals a lot. I work at Patheos, and the evangelical channel manager was constantly flipping his lid about Andy Stanley, whatever Andy Stanley had said that Sunday, when he says that, hell isn't necessarily a literal place, and evangelical, just, so it's, so on the one hand, megachurch, and, relatively, aligned, Baptist aligned. But on the other hand, there's all that kind of stuff that comes out of it. So, it's been much better than I anticipated, which is good.
Yeah. Well, I was, I walked into it not thinking at all about being in the South, and I was the opposite. I was quite surprised. Let's see. Did you run into many issues with religion in schools, though, even though not so much in personal life? And
the way that we did, yes, but it really wasn't religion directly. It was the treatment of science. Which is, has its origins in the religious majority. But it was mostly teachers. I just talked about this on my podcast. It's teachers trying to avoid conflict.
Yep.
And there was actually a really depressing study that Penn State did several years ago, in which they looked at science illiteracy in the United States and tried to determine, what the causal factors are.
Yeah.
And it is not primarily creationists in the science classroom. They determined that 13% of science teachers at the high school level are overt creationists, and some of them behave themselves and some do not. Some are creationists in their beliefs and still toe the science line, and some do not. They are not primarily the problem. The problem is a much larger number of what they call conflict avoiders, teachers who water down the curriculum or say that it's, as my son's biology teacher said one time, he said, now we're going to talk about evolution today. And I want you to know this is just one guy's idea, that it's that kind of stuff. And then there were several other examples that my kids ran into where they had a very solid grounding in evolution as kids. They were very excited about it. They saw it everywhere, that whole thing. And then they go into the classroom and they know when a teacher starts saying something like evolution is only a theory, they know that that's a dog whistle. They know what that means. Right. So it's that sort of stuff that we ran into. And we had to actually, I think it was 2 or 3 times, I can't remember for sure, that we actually had to confront it. We actually had to contact either the teacher or I think it was 3 times, because 2 times we actually had to go as far as the principal, not getting, I always recommend go to the teacher first, go to the one who's creating a problem first. Yeah. Don't just, escalate right away. But then if you're not getting satisfaction, as we weren't, then you talk to the principal. And what you will get more often than not, no matter where you live, you have a much greater chance of the principal being somebody who knows the law and district policy, if not the law. And so these are the people who very often will go, she said, what? They'll sort of lean forward and recognize instantly that that's what's going on. Not always. Sometimes, the principal will also be an issue, and then you got to go higher to the superintendent level or something like that. At some point, 98% of the time, you're going to hit somebody who knows what's what. Right. Who's actually an educated educator and is going to know that. Sometimes it's the teachers, but if you do have to go up a little bit, we certainly found that you will eventually find somebody who, if nothing else, just doesn't want to get sued. Right. Sometimes they see that it's the right thing, and sometimes they see that it's a legal thing. So either way, that's fine. I'll take it. That's fine. I'll take it. Right? Yeah. Oh my gosh. So your kids are mostly grown up, right? Now, what are their ages again? They're in their 40s now, I think. Oh, maybe it feels like that. No, they are now 17, 21, and 23. Right. When the first book came out, they were 6, 9, and 11. And, it's, they're in a very different place. And it's great now to be doing the podcast and to be able to, because when they were young and I was blogging about parenting and all this, you're sort of saying, this seems like a good idea, and this is what other people are saying has worked for them. And this is what psychologists say works. Yes. But now I'm able to add to that the outcome of these kids. Not to go on and on, but these are some great people. And I just we got the outcomes we wanted. And what we wanted were decent, humane, empathetic, intelligent, compassionate, curious kids. Right. And we got 3 out of 3,
Awesome.
It's just really, exactly. Yeah. So it's really gratifying.
Yeah.
To be sort of at the payoff point and be able to, and then to have adult relationships with your kids and all that. That is just a delightful thing.
I'm not there yet. That's going to be a neat stage.
It's really a neat thing. And just to see them, making their choices and gaining their independence and putting a toe out there. But if you do the whole attachment parenting thing well, they feel comfortable doing that. They feel like they can go out from the safe, home base and come back and go out. And, that's ideal.
Yeah. My sister's son just turned 20 and that kind of jolted me. I can't wait to see what they do when my kids get older. I'm so excited about who they are right now, and I want to see what happens with that.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like watching those flowers bloom in slow motion on TV. Okay, what's it going to do next?
Right.
It's going to be fantastic.
Yeah.
So, any regrets?
There are some things that actually some of this shows up in the second book, because there are some things that I just don't. I don't think we attended to soon enough. One of the things that there's a little bit of a tendency that I was aware of from the beginning, but fell into the trap anyway, of sort of getting them to a certain point and going, oh, great, there, that part is done, and not thinking ahead to what their additional developing needs are. And one of the things that I wish we'd gotten on sooner was community. Was the idea of connecting them in meaningful ways to other people. They have their friend groups and that sort of thing. But one of the things that churches, when they do it well, do really well, is giving kids and people in general a sense of meaningful connection to others. That social connection is what sociologists, there's been some fantastic sociology done on this, looking at the reasons that people go to church. People primarily don't go to church for God. Newsflash, it's not primarily about theology. They were able to tease apart the variables. And one of the interesting ways they did this is the life satisfaction measures. This is the thing that is so irritating. We're always hit over the head with this. In terms of life satisfaction, churchgoers are at the top. They're the most life-satisfied people there are, and non-churchgoers are below that. And that's all the further it has typically gone when Gallup and Harris and so on asked the question. But this team from the University of Wisconsin and Harvard dug deeper into it in this really well-designed study in which they teased out the variables. And they found out that the life satisfaction measures actually break down further. It goes like this. The most satisfied people, the people most satisfied with their lives, are churchgoers who have close friends in the congregation. The next most satisfied with their lives are non-churchgoers, us. And the least satisfied are churchgoers who have no friends in the congregation. Because the first group goes on a Sunday, not only do they hear the talk and all this, but they see their friends and there's the hug and somebody asks how your bad back is doing and how your daughter's doing at college and all this sort of connection, right? And so 10 or more close friends in the congregation, they tend to have life satisfaction measures more than twice those of somebody sitting next to them in the pews who has no close friends there, because they're being hit in the face with everybody else's connections every Sunday, and they're not feeling it. So that the researchers said social connection is what church is all about. That getting together with people and doing something meaningful on a regular basis is the exact way they put it. So it could be getting together and listening to an inspirational talk, and meeting each other. It could be volunteering, right? So one of the things that I talked about in the second book, and one of the things that we got our kids involved in once we kind of woke up, is getting more involved in volunteer opportunities at their schools, getting involved in clubs, getting involved in sports teams and musical groups and so on. It can be all sorts of things. But I didn't recognize it early enough because I'm kind of a loner. I'm an introvert. I'm perfectly fine to sit with a book and, for hours at a time. Whenever somebody would talk to me, because I am very big about helping non-religious people find community if they want it. I like hanging out with my wife and kids.
Yeah.
That's all I need.
Yeah.
So I sort of projected that on my kids. And it didn't occur to me that they might be different from me. They might have different social needs. And I think they really do, to varying degrees. I think, one of them, not as much as the other two. But that's one of my regrets, is that we didn't get on that quite as early. We eventually did. I think everything is fine. Yeah. But it's just something that they struggled with a little bit. That feeling of disconnectedness is something that that they have struggled with in a way that I think some religious families, they've got an asset that that we don't necessarily have. So
there's that evolution coming in again. We're social animals.
Sure. Yeah.
We need that. And recognizing that one's children can be very different from who you are. That's a sign of being a good parent if you're paying attention, because they're not going to be carbon copies of you, and you can't treat them that way. Right. And that's kind of how my parents tried to raise me, and it didn't really work so well. So I recognize when you see your kiddo and they need more social interaction than you do, and you take care of that, that is some excellent parenting. Let's see, your wife, religious for half your marriage, I think you said at one point. And
it's almost exactly half now.
Yeah. How did that impact things?
Yeah, it was much less of an issue than you might think. It was one of the things, when I wrote the book In Faith and in Doubt, I talk about why this was for us less of an issue than it might have been. And why, because of the changing nature of religion, it's less an issue for a lot of people than it used to be. It used to be very, very rare that you would have marriages across that particular line, religious and non-religious. But there's an absolutely exploding number of people who identify as religious, but share 90% of the values with non-religious people. They actually share more values with the non-religious than they do with conservative evangelicals. Right. So my wife and I, from the beginning, share, and it's good to distinguish the terms here, because beliefs and values are often used interchangeably. Yeah. Beliefs are opinions about what is true. Like I believe that God exists. I believe that we go to heaven when we die. Right. That's an opinion. That isn't necessarily factual, but it's about the existence of something, right? Values are opinions about what is good, as opposed to what's true. Right. So my wife and I differed on whether Jesus Christ was our Savior, right? That we differed on, but we agreed on LGBTQ issues. We agreed on basically the whole raft of progressive issues. We agreed on a woman's right to choose. We agreed on, gender equity, on and on. I think if we had differed in values, we would have had a much more difficult time than we did. But as it is, we only differed on little things like God. Is the way I put it. Because seriously, how much does that impact your daily life?
Well, for me, not much, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That part of it is less important. The problem with religion frequently is that it can bring toxic values along with it. Yeah. But she had the religious identity without the toxic values. She had a very progressive religious identity. Every once in a while, we would, we'd kind of get frustrated over an issue or whatever, but it was primarily not about the kids. That's where, if it comes up with the kids and you can't come to agreement on those things, that can really be an issue. But we were awesome. We really did. We both did equally well, which means if the kids came to one of us with a religious question, like when my daughter came to me and said, did Jesus really rise from the dead? I said, I don't think he did. I think that's a story that to make us feel better about death. But I know that mom thinks he did. So you ought to talk to mom and find out what she believes. And then the great thing is that you get to make up your own mind, and you can change your mind as often as you want.
Right.
She did the same thing in reverse. I mean, here's a religious parent who was entirely comfortable saying, Dad believes differently and you get to make up your own mind. Bingo. That was no problem. And so our kids kind of got this great advantage of religious literacy and seeing two points of view and recognizing that they had a choice. It really was ideal. And then when she decided that she was a secular humanist, now about 14 years ago, that's great. But I mean, there was no pressure from me on the question whatsoever. But the interesting thing is it worried me a little bit with the kids because I thought, okay, now they're in a household where we're in agreement on those issues. We got to be sure that they have opportunities to get outside, that bubble. And it wasn't a problem. I mean, you still have extended family and all that sort of thing. But but it was really interesting. It was an interesting transition.
Yeah. So the extended family, did they play a part, especially after she became a secular humanist? Or
yeah, we actually, my mother-in-law lived on our street for about a few years.
Wow.
Which was great. No, it was perfect. It was fine. No, she's terrific. She's really, I am very fortunate in my extended family. Religion is a very big deal to her. It's a very big part of her identity. And so when my son outed me to her when he was 5 and they were playing Play-Doh and, he said, her nickname is BG. Which stands for beautiful grandma, and it's the nickname she gave herself. So it.
Okay.
But when he said, "BG, do you believe in God?" and she said, "Oh, yes, I very much believe in God," and he said, "Oh, because Dad doesn't," and there it was. So this was, many, many years ago. Yeah. But the way she handled that, the way she came around and handled that was just wonderful. It was really terrific. It was not immediately easy for her, but it was really good. So, and she became a resource for our kids to go. And, we talked about the idea of them asking her questions and, and we would go to her church once in a while so they could get that sort of religious literacy. And they had additional extended family, aunts and uncles and all that who were religious. The strange thing they had is also a significant number of atheists in their extended family. My mother, my wife's father, my wife's stepmother, my kids' uncles, so was kind of unusual. So we've actually got a really bifurcated, family, lots of atheists, lots of quite religious Southern Baptists. So,
wow.
So it's fun.
Yeah. Well, in our family, we're the only, at least, we're the only atheists, and my husband, his family is the extreme Southern Baptist, but they have, as you seem to have found, we've come to an agreement, and they've asked lots of questions to find out why we think what we think, and what atheism does not mean. That's a big one. Because the things that are taught in churches about what an atheist is so incredibly wrong. So educating helps. But my in-laws, to their credit, have moved from being understandably heartbroken to working very hard at the relationship and making sure that we're all very close. And so do we. And it's fantastic. I wish everyone was so lucky. I know that not everybody is.
It's so good to hear that. Whenever I hear that, it's basically they're prioritizing the relationship. And that's what it's all about. I mean, that's ideal. That's also what I would say my mother-in-law did. Family is very important to her as well. And the best thing we can do, the best thing any of us can do is really just be an example. We don't even have to, it's just allowing them to confront a compassionate, decent, normal atheist every day is better than any lectures. It's better than any books we can have them read. It's the example. It's I always think of the neighbor of mine, her mother. So at that point she was, maybe in her late 60s or something. Very Catholic woman, just the most wonderful, sweetest. I love this woman. And she found out I was an atheist. And she said, "You're an atheist?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, "And you're such a kind-hearted person,
Yep.
It's just, and it wasn't in judgment. It wasn't,
No.
it was a great moment.
Yeah. It was
You're
genuine
such a kind-hearted
surprise. Yeah.
person. Yeah. You can hear the plaster cracking. You can hear
Yeah. Yeah.
this change in worldview. Those are the most powerful moments
Yeah.
when you do that, because up to that point, when they don't know that they know atheists, this is why it's important to be out,
If you can be. Yep.
if you possibly can be, you can actually complicate people's worlds.
Yeah.
You can actually complicate it in a good way. So,
Yeah. I did that for a friend. She super duper Southern Baptist here in Austin. And she would ask me questions. It was obvious that she had gone away and talked to her Bible study group or something, and would come back to me with these questions about, well, how about this? And what do you think of that? And I said, I would be willing to come talk to your Bible study class. And she said, really? Yes. They don't understand how you're a good person, but you're atheist. And so I went and talked with them, and it was delightful. It was also a little bit disturbing because there were several people there who had the golden ticket sort of idea about religion. It doesn't matter if you're a good or bad person. If you have that golden ticket of, I have accepted Jesus as my personal savior, you're in, period.
Right.
And that's the first time I'd ever heard of that. And I was astonished at that. But it was interesting how many people asked about death and how I felt about death. And the questions were so careful and well thought out that it was obvious that they had been thinking about this. And I think one person in the very back of the room was a little bit on the edge of how he felt about religion. And I said, I talked to them about death, just like you have, and we'll get to that about your podcast. But educating is so important, and being that person that you want them to think an atheist is, and reaching out when you can. Right? Yeah. Cool. What has your approach been about religious literacy? I'm guessing pretty open.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, the thing is, again, another side of anthropology is cultural anthropology. So I had a lot of that in school as well. And folklore. I don't know if you know the name Alan Dundes, but Alan Dundes is the preeminent folklorist of his generation. He actually created the academic field of folkloristics. Cool. It's now taught at college campuses because of Alan Dundes. And Alan looked like a character that should live under a bridge. He's just this fantastic sort of, not in an ugly way, but in sort of this, like he's some sort of a fantasy creature. And he was just so excited about folklore, which is all the little informal pieces of anthropology, the everyday traditions and, nursery rhymes and traditions, family traditions, and all those sorts of things. So when I think about religious literacy, I'm thinking about all of that. I'm not just thinking about sitting in a Methodist church, and listening to whatever the doctrine is. Right. It's all part of the same thing. And when you think about it that way, the tapestry of it is absolutely spectacular. It's absolutely wonderful. It is all these different attempts of human beings to understand the world and to make their way in the world. And I was a devotee of Greek and Roman myths, especially when I was a kid. I was the kid in second grade who dressed up like Apollo for a class presentation. And what's his name? Martin from The Simpsons. The little the kid who dances around in a toga once in a while and with a harp. That's me. That was me in second grade. And I did a presentation on the 12 Olympians of the Pantheon, and all this sort of thing. It was huge for me. So my kids learn about religion. Yes. We told stories of the creation of the world, but we told stories from about 15 different points of view, all these different mythic and religious perspectives, including the Judeo-Christian. It's just sort of in there. And it's interesting in that way. The other thing we did is just noticed it. in the world. It's not a matter of sitting down and saying, okay, chapter 7, we're going to learn about that. Just is deadly. But when we're out driving around, and my daughter was 4 years old and she saw a mosque out the window with a gold dome, and she said, ooh, that's pretty. There's an opportunity for 10 seconds to say, oh yeah, that's a kind of a church called a mosque. And it's interesting. People who go to a church like that pray 5 times a day. They face a city far away and they pray 5 times a day. And then you just go on, right? And then a few weeks later, that conversation actually happened. And a few weeks later, my daughter saw a woman in a hijab, and she said, oh, look at her. And I said, oh, you know what? She might be Muslim. That's the kind of person who might go to that church that we saw the other day. Remember the mosque? And so you just connect all these points, all these observations, and in these informal ways, just because it's interesting, and notice it in the news, bad things, good things, whatever. And then gradually they get this this network, this sort of connected web of understanding after this happens hundreds and thousands of times. And they will be more deeply religiously literate than nearly any adults in any given room. They are going to see what it is to be human in a different way, and to see religion in a different way.
Right. And something that I don't think I did such a good job, I tried to do that as well. I think that I focused a little bit too much on the negative. And my son has almost a reactionary, negative, like, I don't even want to go into a church sort of thing now. And then so I think we took it a little too far in the negative thing. So folks, avoid that. Try to keep it balanced better than I did. And you know what? It occurs to me that what you're talking about sounds very much like sex ed. You don't sit down and have the talk. It's one of these things that's sprinkled throughout your experience with your child, and you take advantage of situations that are there to talk about it. It's like, why are those girls holding hands? There you go.
Oh,
There's your sex ed.
Oh, it's a great...
Right.
It's a great analogy. I mean, it's really true of most education and most parenting. Most things are like most other things. Good education and good parenting is like good education and good parenting over on that topic and over on that topic. It tends to have the same elements, a lot of the same elements of approach. Right. And the more it's just sort of woven into experience. This is why I really, I'm a huge public schools advocate, and my wife is a public school teacher, and my kids go to public schools. But I really understand homeschooling and unschooling and all those sorts of things, because they are trying to, at its best, they are taking the next step and trying to do that, to integrate the education into everyday experience. Especially unschooling, does that sort of thing. It can also be this horrible, toxic way of shielding the kids from knowledge. Right. But when it is, it's like anything. When it's done right, it can actually achieve great things.
Yeah, I have one friend who did it right, and her children are amazing. But I've seen lots of others that the other happened, and that's kind of unfortunate. I want to talk about your podcasts. Can we do that? You have 3 of them. Oh, yeah. I want to talk first about how music does that. I have a music background as well. My dad taught music literature and piano performance, and so I was steeped in that. I don't. If my father was home, he was playing the piano, so I grew up to the piano being played all the time. So when I have heard you talk about how music does that in other contexts, I'm like, yes, I get that. So tell people about this wonderful podcast where you're finally putting it all out there in an organized fashion, and I love it.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Well, a lot of people don't know that I was a music professor first. My first career, starting when I was 28 years old, I was also, being a musician, I'm sensitive to sounds, and I don't know if you can hear my neighbor cutting down all of the trees in Atlanta right now.
Yes, but I can hear it.
It just goes on and on and on of all days. Anyway, but how music does that is about the incredibly weird fact that vibrations in the air can make us feel things. They can make us feel emotions. there is this this art that has developed that could easily have, I could imagine this not having developed as an art, but we created this actual way of structuring sound such that it can move you without lyrics, without a story, just pitches in the air, and it can make you cry. That's what the podcast is about. It's about looking at music from all different areas. I have one episode about why cool music is cool. You know, what is the element of cool? When you listen to something, you say, you know, what explains that? I talk about some music theory things, like you know, something I call Wolfie's alarm clock. The seventh note of the scale has a particular aspect to it. The fact that the tonic, the key that you're in, serves as an emotional home, and that composers use that fact, and they use the other chords in the key to take you away from home and to flirt with home and to come back home, and then to go away and possibly not come back. All of that emotional aspect is fascinating to me. And the great thing is, you don't need to know what's going on for it to affect you. It's a language that you don't even know you know. Yeah. But knowing is fun. Knowing is really amazing, and it doesn't change the effect at all. It doesn't ruin it. You know, some people worry, oh, don't tell me how it works. You know, it's going to ruin it. But it just opens up this whole new understanding of it, in the same way that understanding science opens up a whole, doesn't ruin, you know, the rainbow, like that whole, you've heard the, what was it? Keats, I think it is, who said that Newton unwove the rainbow. You know, it used to be wonderful, and now it's just this, it's in the catalog of common things. No. And then Richard Dawkins wrote Unweaving the Rainbow, really good book that a lot of people haven't read. But it's, the initial name for my blog was, when I was blogging about music, was Unweaving the Score, because it's exactly the same idea. But now the podcast is called How Music Does That, and I'm having a lot of fun.
And I can tell the viewers from, I know a little bit about music, but it's very friendly to folks who may not know anything about music. It's not written just for the musician. And I've learned a lot, and it's just wonderful. It's also very funny. Dale is always funny. He's always got something in there that'll make me laugh. Yeah. And then there's one that came out at exactly the time when I was having the existential crisis that you seemed to be having when you were doing all of the things that led up to this, The Lucky Ones. Tell us about that.
The Lucky Ones, it's interesting. The Lucky Ones is actually a book. It's the first book I ever wrote. I went hiking in England when I was 42 years old. Over the course of 6 months, I did a number of long-distance hikes. And I was having a kind of midlife crisis at that time, and really thinking about mortality a lot. And so I wrote this narrative of essentially being on the trails and thinking about mortality and engaging English history and the landscape and the people. And I loved it. It's one of my favorite things that I've ever written. And then my agent proceeded to not find a publisher for it for 10 years. He tried to sell it for 10 years. And it was finally after a few years that he said, you know what, let's get another project going while I'm trying this. And I said, hey, how about something on secular parenting? And that was Parenting Beyond Belief. But so this is this humorous, death-obsessed travel narrative from many years ago that I'm basically serializing in 30 episodes. And it is... the idea is to focus on mortality, but part of the running gag is that I keep forgetting to do that over the course of it, because that's what happens. You know, even somebody like me who thinks about mortality a lot, I will go for months without thinking about it because I'm distracted by life. So it unfolds in that way that you know, brings a lot of people into it, like Samuel Pepys and Michel de Montaigne, you know, these other philosophers and writers who thought about death and who were a lot closer to it than I ever have been. So I think, and currently I'm on the Cotswold Way. I'm just finishing up the Cotswold Way, and the hikes gradually go north, and they become more serious and they become more dangerous. And it's then, unsurprisingly, that I begin talking more about mortality. So that's yet to come.
All right. A cliffhanger there, if you will. And Raising Freethinkers podcast. How about that one?
Yeah, Raising Freethinkers is another one that I'm just really glad to be doing. What this amounts to is basically I realized that I had a lot of material that I have written and spoken over the years to various audiences, and most of it hasn't been heard by most people. I actually figured it out. It's something around 2 million words that I have in books or blogs or podcasts or speeches where I would go give a speech in Cleveland to 15 people. And it's material that's actually relevant and interesting that I don't have anywhere else. So what I'm doing is drawing on that material to create thematic episodes that approach talking to kids about death or curiosity or fear or public schools, dealing with church state issues. And it's putting it in this new medium, and it's putting it in sort of a narrative storytelling format so that it's kind of giving some ideas that that really mean a lot to me, a new life, a new way of engaging. And I just love podcasts myself. It's become a really big thing for me because you can do other things while you're listening.
Yep.
You don't have to sit down and stare at it like a blog. So to be able to put it in a narrative format that's funny on occasion, that's serious on occasion, but has music and other effects going along with it. I'm really having a lot of fun with that. And when I hear once in a while from people who are encountering the ideas for the first time and who are getting a lot of satisfaction out of it, that's really a nice thing.
Yeah. It occurs to me when I was a kid, we would listen to records. We were listening to podcasts, basically. Yeah. There was nothing to look at. You just did whatever you were doing and listened. And
that's right.
And it's a lovely thing.
Yeah.
And I highly recommend to everybody to check out all 3 of the podcasts. They're all wonderful. They're beautifully produced and fun. They're fun to listen to.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what's next? It's you all has got something on the coming up the conveyor belt.
I mean, my real hope is that my wife sat me down last year and said, we just had a conversation because I was in a job transition and all that from some of the I've been a managing editor for a couple of websites and all that sort of thing. And she said, if you could just do something for the rest of your life now, what would that be? If there were no other constraints, what would it be? And I said, writing and teaching and speaking. Those are the things that if I could just every day get up and know that I was doing those things, I would be really happy. And podcasts are writing and teaching and speaking. It's all 3 of those things together. But I'm also getting back to music, and the job you mentioned at Oglethorpe University is one I've been hired, but I haven't started yet. That actually starts this fall. I'm back in the classroom teaching music courses at Oglethorpe, and so excited about that. So it's entirely possible that a few years from now it's a part-time thing for now, but I could end up a musician again, after all my wandering in these various areas, and then just keep going with the podcasts and to keep my hand in secular parenting. And that would be ideal for me.
Yeah. Life is long. There's plenty of time to do all the things.
Exactly.
Right?
That's right.
Thank you so much, Dale. This was just wonderful to hear your take on all of these things and hear some more about you as a person. I hope everybody else enjoyed watching it. Thank you, Dale, one more time. Thank you to everybody on the other side of the wall over here who set up all the technical stuff so we could actually do this stuff. Yep. And I think you need to go find your kid and give him a hug. Take care. Bye.